They're going to want to make sure they're able to go for a victory. And Frozen is going to be starting things off for Evolution with a control mage here, Darok. So they've concealed so much information, and now we finally see what mage deck they're going to be bringing to the tournament.
Yeah, so already different from most of the mage decks we've seen so far, because I think this might be one of the few Frostlich Jaina mages we're seeing at all, because from most of the Chinese teams, they seem to be omitting Frostlich Jaina and putting in Pyroblast instead for a little bit of extra burn potential, going for a much more freeze magey plan. But for Frozen, he is going for what seems to be the kind of more removal-heavy, kind of freeze Frostlich Jaina mage, trying to remove everything that can come down from his opponents in the early game, and then follow up with a tide of water elementals to heal him back to a victory.
And a Keleseth already there for Mitsuhide. He's turned up quite a lot in this tournament, has been very helpful in matchups. You saw both players trying to cover the top of their screens there, trying to get a look at the cards that were being thrown away, of course, after they'd done the mulligan themselves. And Frozen, a shake of the head when he sees that there's some cards that are being kept, because what card are you going to keep? This bad boy being tossed onto the board. And that is going to be a perfect start for Mitsuhide to try and run away with this game.
That's exactly right. Getting the Keleseth down, even without a Shadow Step, it's just incredibly powerful. Now what he's going to be looking for are cards like Captain to get that Patches out and really start running away with the board. Scalebane to start applying some real pressure in the mid-game as he goes towards that Bone Mare to close things out. But for Frozen, while he's got a fairly slow early game, the Medivh's Valet is not bad at all. He's got some very strong mid-game cards to start pulling this back until he can find the Alexstrasza Medivh or Frostlich Jaina.
I mean, that Meteor is going to be extremely important later on if you start to see some big chunky minions come down from Bone Mares, for example, if Lich King turns up. But this is an awkward turn for Mitsuhide. I mean, there is just the option of Dagger, Firefly, and you could trade if you want, or you could just start sending some damage towards face.
Yeah, that seems to be the way to go. It's kind of an interesting matchup when it comes to attacking minions with your dagger from the rogue, because with some builds of this deck, especially from the Chinese players with Pyroblast, you can't just take unlimited damage. It's not like certain matchups where the control decks don't have any burst. Very often the mage deck wins through exactly burst, through something like Fireball, Frostbolt, Medivh's Valet, firing it all towards your face. So Mitsu taking a slightly more patient line of approach, realizing I can just dagger it on the next turn as well, maybe in combination with an SI7 agent.
So much card draw available for Frozen now, so I imagine one of these Arcane Intellect is going to be used to draw 2 more cards. And I mean, his game plan is just remove, 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 get to Frostlich Jaina and survive. And basically, if you get to turn 9 and you're able to drop Frostlich Jaina, you're in such a comfortable spot as the mage.
Yeah, I think you're right. And for Frozen here, he's in a more comfortable spot the more I see the cards in his deck, because we see from certain players in this kind of Frostlich Jaina mage, they omit the freeze effects. You don't have Frost Nova, Blizzard, and Doomsayer, and you instead rely on double Polymorph, double Meteor, Flame Strike, all that good stuff to kill things off. But in my experience, this version of the deck has a much better matchup against the Rogue, because once things like the Scalebane and Bone Mare come down, there's often not too many answers to kill off a Doomsayer. You basically say to them, you have to have a Valspine Slayer to get through this. So it's, I think, going to be scaling very well for Frozen in the later stages of the game.
An interesting value trade there from Frozen. He did leave himself very open to something like an SI7 agent, but I think he was trying to get value out of his Volcanic Potion in the following turn, being able to clear off any minions that might come onto the board, for example. If something like a Captain had dropped, he would have been able to have the ability to Volcanic Potion, coin, ping, and then be able to clear the board, which he could do here, but maybe a lot of resources for a slightly underwhelming board under the circumstances.
Yeah, and now for Frozen, you know, more interesting options. Like you said, took a fairly greedy approach, one might say, sacrificing some of his health total. And, you know, he can do the same thing here. He has the option to completely clear the board with Volcanic Potion, coin, ping. But clearly doesn't even think it's worth it here. The 6 damage on board coming to face, he is not afraid of, because we saw in the Mulligan phase there's the Ice Barrier in the deck. Frostlich Jaina, Alexstrasza, a lot of health gain to bring himself back up to a much more respectable life total. And I think I like this. Saving the coin here could be really strong for something like Coin Meteor or Coin into Firelands.
Mitsuhide can probably just drop this Scalebane here, which is going to make a very big board. And maybe the thought process from Frozen here is you can go into Coin Blizzard, you can stall, you can clear off some of these smaller minions, and then you've got a following turn of a Meteor then, in case anything big and chunky is on the board. Yeah. The Blizzard, of course, will deal with Keleseth and the Flame Elemental as well. And that damage going on to the SI7 agent might indicate a chance for Frozen to do that. Alternatively, Medivh's Valet is going to get value if you want it here, but I don't know. I'm quite liking the Blizzard, Darrow.
It's a tough one because Mitsu has, you know, made some great positioning around Meteor. Obviously, switching the Keleseth and the Flame Elemental would be perfect, but you're not complaining too much. But still, it looks like Frozen is going to be going for the Blizzard line of play, like you were suggesting, because you have Blizzard into Blizzard, that freeze, that extra damage, maybe even just Blizzard into Meteor to kill off all the minions before the Bone Mare comes down. Looks very strong to me.
Yeah, Mitsuhide can play around Meteor positioning, of course, if he wants to here. But, I mean, what are you putting on the board? Are you prepared to sacrifice one of your Valspine Slayers? Is that going to... You're going to need value out of it later? Alternatively, what? Your Swashbuckler you're going to put on the board, see what you can draw. Of course, the Swashbuckler is fantastic in this matchup. Anything that can generate cards from a mage, find you Ice Blocks, that's really going to help, for example. Yeah,
anything like that. Arcane Intellect, Ice Block, any kind of burn damage to start killing off your opponent as well is very respectable indeed. But for the Valspine here, now that he's seen the Blizzard, he can be fairly sure that there's Doomsayers in his deck. I mean, I say there are lists that are omitting Doomsayer. It's pretty common to find them in this kind of freezy burn mage. But at the same time, the Valspine Slayer has been buffed. It's just a 4/5. And if he absolutely has to kill off a Doomsayer, he's got Leroy Jenkins with the hero power.
And of course, Mitsuhide trying to position himself around Meteor as well, trying not to be too vulnerable to it. But that second Blizzard from Frozen looks even better now. I mean, you can freeze once again, get rid of some of these smaller minions, and then you've got a Meteor to follow up. Alexstrasza now being in hand as well. It's another defensive option if you need it, but also an aggressive one if you need it as well. Yeah,
very true. And looking at Frozen's deck, it seems like he is fairly high on the burn with, you know, the Firelands Portal, also probably indicating Medivh the Guardian is in the deck. So like you said, if the board pressure doesn't mount up too much from Mitsuhide, we could very much expect to see an Alexstrasza on the Rogue to start going on the offensive. But I think given that there's the Bone Mare here, there's also the 4-drop that was gained from Mitsu as well, probably a fair amount of pressure coming down.
It doesn't feel great using the Bone Mare here, though. You want to get the value out of the extra 4 charge, right? The extra attack. But if you figure there is a way that you can actually survive any AoE from your opponent, then I guess it's worth considering. No Shadow Step found yet for Mitsuhide, so there's not the possibility of Leroy into Shadow Step into Leroy into Cold Blood or something like that. So still needs to do a decent amount of damage to Frozen before he can even think about any lethal opportunities.
Yeah, so also going for, I suppose, the best Meteor play here. It's interesting. He puts the the strongest minions on the outside, which seems to be mostly correct. This does allow, though, for the killing of Scalebane and... actually, I suppose it only works out badly because the buff fell on the Valspine. The buff could very well have fallen on the Bone Mare, and then it would have been correct. So yeah, I think from Mitsu, this is the correct play around Meteor, but Frozen does have it anyway, just lets it go, because he's still got fantastic follow-up. Polymorph, if this Bone Mare has another Bone Mare on top of it, or Firelands Portal to take out, develop a minion, start going for Alexstrasza. Some really nice options.
So I think he's one off actually being able to pop here, right, with the... Wow. Unless Leroy's buffed up, but I don't think Leroy is buffed up because Leroy's been in hand since the start, as far as I'm aware. Obviously, I can't see it because of the little box, but the SI7 agent can be used with Leroy Jenkins as well. Of course, you've got the Swashbuckler there. That's going to do a decent amount of damage, but you're not quite there just yet this turn, but you can get him pretty low.
Yeah, you can actually. It's a good point. 11, 14, yep, 1 damage off lethal as I count as well. Going the turn before Frostlich Jaina and Alexstrasza is really nice, but the thing is, going for the Ice Block pop the turn before Alexstrasza or Frostlich Jaina is the most important thing. If they have an Ice Block up going into turn 9, they have a good chance of pulling ahead, and it looks like Mitsu is not going for quite so aggressive of a game plan here.
No, I don't think you need to at this point. You can still conceal the fact you have Leroy in your deck. You could try and be able to burst your opponent down before you use Leroy, and then if later on Frostlich Jaina does come out to play, then you still have even more damage in your hand as well to chunk through that armor that she provides you with.
And as we can see now from Frozen, the fact that on turn 4, I believe, he didn't go for the Volcanic Potion Coin Ping is potentially having some pretty big repercussions, because I was saying I liked the fact that he was being a bit more liberal with his health total, allowing himself to be taken down to this low point, and it did allow him coin Blizzard into Blizzard, but he is very susceptible now just to burst damage, going with the Volcanic Potion here, and that is going to allow the Ice Block pop from Mitsuhide going into turn 9. I was just saying how important that is, so it's not looking that bad for Frozen, unless he can clear the board whilst also playing Alexstrasza.
This is perfect for Mitsu, though. He can pop it without using the Leroy that's in his hand. He's now got a deckhand there as well.
Wow.
So that's even more damage. That's, what, 10 damage just coming out from hand. Add your weapon as well. That's 11. So even if your opponent does Alexstrasza back up, you still have those draws, potentially, of Shadow Step to be able to just win that game outright.
And I think what it's going to come down to here for Frozen is whether he can clear the board while playing Alexstrasza at the same time. And in order to do that, because you have basically no mana spare when you play Alexstrasza, he needs to have a board. So if he can find time to play Medivh the Guardian and therefore gain back board control, then maybe we can start to see a comeback here. But as you said, the high amount of burst damage from Mitsuhide might just mean he doesn't have time to get the Alexstrasza down at all.
So what's the most convenient way to pop and it still keep damage back? Of course, you've got 6 on board already. You can use a deckhand to pop if you would like. You could just pop him at 2 if you want to keep your weapon desperately. Which is what... Oh, okay, some trading. Yeah, alright, I like this.
I think I like this too, because if we see the board being cleared by Frozen and developing another Ice Block or playing down the Alexstrasza, all of a sudden it might just be the fact that there's not enough damage on board for Mitsuhide to clear him off. So I think he's perfectly spotted here. It's more important for him to keep the board control than to pop his opponent at 1 health, because he has that Leroy Jenkins to close things out.
So of course, if Frozen does just go for a defensive Alexstrasza here, that is just game over with Leroy in hand. So you'd imagine that Frozen is probably going to have made that read, that card that's been sat in Mitsuhide's hand for quite a while, especially judging by the play Mitsuhide's just made as well. So Ice Block is almost certainly going to be coming down here, but how can you negate some of this damage on board to try and have a little amount of damage for your opponent when you do put Alexstrasza on 10, potentially?
Oh, it just doesn't quite work out, does it, Dan? You could go for the Fireball here in combination with the ping on the Steam Surger, but then you can't go Alexstrasza ping on the following turn to finish it off. Just not quite there for him at the moment, and he does go for the Alexstrasza in the end. He thinks it's worth the risk, which means Mitsu is going to be closing out game 1 with his perfect navigation of the later stages of the game, keeping board control where necessary, applying just the right amount of pressure to close out the game with his Rogue.
Advantage Celestial then in the winner's bracket here at the GCWC, and Evolution, despite the fact they have withheld so much information, they bring this mage that their opponent knew nothing about, but they still aren't able to find a victory. So that will be Frozen unable to compete for the rest of today. And now it's going to be down to both Pavel and OldBoy to try and bring this one back for Team Evolution.
And it's going to be a tough one. We've seen from some of the teams like TSM, they bring this very anti-aggro control Warlock with double Galactic Crawler that feels like a really nice counter to this Rogue from Celestial. But from Evolution, they don't have that. They've got the Zoo, which granted has done very well for them, but I don't feel like there's quite so strong a counter against the Rogue, and it's only game 1.
And do you think, I know we were talking about what was turn 4, the possibility of Volcanic Potion, Coin, Ping. Was that maybe a line of play that Frozen could have been considering? It was quite an offensive play in the end. He was trying to just keep back all that damage. Maybe he could have gone for that.
I think he could have done, because, you know, he goes for Volcanic Potion, Coin, Ping. He had the Polymorph in hand to deal with a Scalebane, so I think clearing off the board might have been a slightly more important line of play. But on the upside of his play, it allowed him Coin Blizzard into Blizzard, so just even in that first game, so much to think about for Evolution.
So game plan now for Evolution. This isn't the position they probably thought they were going to be in. Having the advantage, having only have revealed 3 of their decks, they were probably thinking, alright, we can go into game 1, get the jump on our opponents, go 1-0 up, and then we can just go counter, 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 breeze through to the next round of the winner's bracket and be all fine and dandy. But things not going how they would have liked. So now they need to try and find a way to actually counter this zoo, this rogue, sorry, and maybe that is with the use of a zoo, quite potentially.
Very possibly. We've seen in this tournament, I think it's had mixed results up against the rogue. It's generally not considered all too favourable of a matchup, I don't think. If you're including Bloodsail Corsairs, as I look at the list, which are actually 2 of them in Evolution's deck, I think that helps the matchup quite a lot, because if you can just snipe off the second charge of a rogue's dagger, that might just give you just enough tempo swing. Maybe they have to use another 2 mana to get the dagger up, which around turns 3 or 4 is a lot of investment, and that could be what Evolution needs to pull ahead in the early game with a zoo.
Well, it is going to be OldBoy taking the seat on the main stage then. A lot of pressure, the least experience on this team for sure, but is he going to be feeling the nerves? We have witnessed him get a 3-0 sweep of his own previously. It was with a zoo as well. So maybe this is another time for him to shine. Just 20 years old, another young player. We've got varying ages here at the GCWC. We have players up to, I think, 32, as well as all the way down to 19. So OldBoy, still one of the younger portion, does have that 1 team kill. What are your thoughts on this player? I mean, he's one of those up-and-coming players as well, I believe.
I think you're right, and we saw in his run at these Summer Championships, he didn't perform overly impressively. You know, solid performance, but not quite enough to get him there to qualify for the World Championships. But Pavel clearly thinks he's a strong player, recruiting him onto Team Evolution, and he's shown so far he's got what it takes. That 3-0 sweep, when his team were 2-0 down, was really one of the most memorable portions of the tournament so far.
Right, Druid time then
Wow.
for Evolution. So they're saying that they feel this is the easiest way to be able to counter this rogue. Again, we haven't seen the Druid from Team Evolution, so it could be a surprise. We've seen both Jade Druids and Big Druids so far this tournament. Which would you say is actually better going into a rogue though, Darroch?
To be honest, considering they're lining up into the rogue, I'm expecting aggro Druid.
Wow.
I feel like Big and Jade, well, Big is, I would say, a pretty unfavourable matchup indeed. Jade Druid, you can find your way getting a victory, but aggro Druid is, I would say, a pretty favourable matchup indeed. But OldBoy clearly doesn't think it's worth it. His best matchup, or at least the deck he is most proficient with up against his this rogue, is the Jade Druid. I find this quite surprising.
I mean, the Jade Druid can do well against tempo rogues, certainly if you can find that early removal. You can find your spreading plagues, for example. You can find your ramp. Obviously, that's the most important. But this is definitely going to be a tough one. A lot of responsibility on the shoulders of OldBoy. And if he does fall here, that will be a 2-0 lead for Celestial, and it will just be Pavel to try and bring it back for the boys. But I guess that's not the worst position to be in, because Pavel is a fantastic player.
He is indeed. He's shown what it's got both historically in Hearthstone and in this tournament as well. At the earlier stages of the tournament, he was one of the players with the best record overall, and I think he's still pretty near the top, even despite losing a few games in the later stages of the tournament. But to get things going here for both of these players, not a particularly fantastic hand for either team. Mitsuhide on the coin would obviously love Edwin Van Cleef to make a nice big minion that the Druid just can't deal with, or as we saw in the last game, Keleseth would have been very nice as well. And just having to take it very slow, which means he can't capitalize on this very slow start from OldBoy.
Yeah, Mitsu does have the coin into Vilespine Slayer, or the backstab into Vilespine Slayer, but whether there's going to be anything significant on the board at that point remains to be seen, because quite often with the Druids, they do just put little pointless minions on the board early on that your opponent just has to deal with as like a nuisance factor, and then it's later on in the game that actually those Vilespine Slayers are going to really come into effect. You see Ken and Bone Mare being in the hand now for Mitsuhide, so that is a fantastic turns 6 and 7 that can be very difficult for any deck to deal with.
That's right, and the Bone Mare, not only a useful pickup for later on, activating the Elder Longneck, allowing Mitsuhide to make a vastly stronger turn than he was looking at otherwise, because he really does not want to use the coin this early on in the game. If he goes for coin into the Saronite Chain Gang, it's a pretty weak play onto the board. He doesn't have strong follow-up. I think he wants to save that coin for Bone Mare to get it down on turn 6, hopefully before an ultimate infestation can come down from OldBoy. But as we look at the insane amount of ramp in his hand now, I do not know if that's going to be a possibility for Mitsu.
This is the thing, Mitsuhide will be actually probably happy that he's brought out a swipe in that situation, because the amount of ramp that could be coming from your opponent, you don't want them to be ramping up to 10 too quickly. If you could stall them from ramping, you get quite a big board, quite a threatening board for yourself, then you are very happy against any sort of ramping variant of a Druid. But speaking of ramp, look at all of this from OldBoy.
The absolute perfect card in this scenario. I was just about to bring up, if he can get the Jade Blossom, he'd go for Ultimate Infestation on the following turn. If he goes for Nourish for ramp, Jade Blossom, I believe that gets him perfectly up to 10 mana. But he needs to think about whether or not it's worth it. There is still the coin in Mitsuhide's hand, but to be honest, thinking about everything that could come down from Mitsu on turn 5, it's either the Scalebane, most likely on 5 mana, or coin into Cairn, both of which Ultimate Infestation is perfect against. You deal the 5 damage, take it out, draw a whole bunch of cards. You can follow up with Malfurion if you're afraid of being killed off. Maybe you get the Spreading Plague off of the draw from Ultimate Infestation. This has just gone from 0 to hero like that from OldBoy.
If you get an opportunity to play an Ultimate Infestation on what is going to be his turn 6, maybe turn 5?
I think turn 5.
Turn 5.
Yeah.
Then
turn 6. Yeah.
You definitely do that, don't you? Especially it clears your hand, it allows you to then restock your hand, and of course we all know the power level of Ultimate Infestation by this point. Mitsuhide will be well aware of this possibility now, though, of Ultimate Infestation coming down, but he's played right into it. But what other options did he have?
You're right, he didn't have a choice. Every other play was just so weak onto the board, as even Kun, the Forgotten King, is picked up for OldBoy. He can get a 7/7 in addition to the Ultimate Infestation. Absolutely ridiculous in terms of power level, and obviously it's not only a strong play onto the board this turn, it opens up turns like this we have coming up. If Mitsuhide goes wide onto the board, we can see a Spreading Plague. If he doesn't, we can just see Jade development from OldBoy. This is going perfectly for him now.
So Mitsuhide can clear the board if he wants deckhand, plus the Vilespine Slayer trade in the 5/3 to the 5/5 as well. That doesn't open yourself up too much to a Spreading Plague, and you might have to go for it, but at the same time you need to start chipping away at this life total from your opponent at some point.
Yeah, I love this play from Mitsu as well. I think while I was saying he should be gearing up towards the coin Bone Mare, which I think he was throughout most of the game, using the Vilespine now while the Jades are quite small on a nice big minion like Kun is a great way to get value out of that card. And then when the board is relatively weak, which it probably will be from OldBoy on this turn because he can't play that many Jade cards, then you go with the Bone Mare and start really applying some pressure to face. This is the out for Mitsu. If he can get the damage in with Bone Mare and then follow up with potentially a Leroy, he could still take this game.
So for OldBoy, if he is sensing the power potentially coming from his opponent, could you just go Malfurion into then Hero Power, take down the 5/3? You've got two options. You can either put two 1/5s in the way to stop that damage, or if you're really ballsy, you could go for some Poisonous Spiders. I don't like it against a rogue, mainly because of backstabs and SI7 agents, for example. But I imagine that we'll go for two 1/5 Scarabs, I would have thought.
Yeah. Actually, now that you say it, the Spiders don't actually look that bad here because of the fact you have so many defensive options. There's now the 3 armor Hero Power, there's Jade Behemoth, Spreading Plague, even that Earthen Scales that we see teched in there to deal with some of the more aggressive options. I like this a lot from OldBoy.
Well, there's way of dealing with the Spooters. Double SI7 agent available, of course, with the coin as well. You can dagger up and get rid of these pesky little 1/2s, and I don't know, I think you might have to in this situation, because if you start pressuring too much with Bone Mares, then your opponent's just going to laugh, being able to take them out very comfortably.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I'm looking at something else, like maybe if you can attack in with the existing Vilespine onto one of the 1/2s, that's not too bad. But just the fact that this shuts down the possibility for Bone Mare on this turn is so insanely potent, as we can see Mitsuhide does have the answer for the Spiders, which isn't bad, obviously, but OldBoy can still be pretty happy here, knowing that he very likely denied a Bone Mare.
Denied a Bone Mare, delayed the game a little bit, gets him closer to more of his Jade cards. He's got 2 Spreading Plagues for delaying as well. Now he's got his Malfurion Hero Power from the Death Knight. Things are looking good for OldBoy. That ramp early on was absolutely phenomenal for him. And there's another Jade Behemoth as well. More stall potential. It's certainly not over for the Rogue. There is still a lot in the hand for Mitsuhide as well. He's got the Bone Mare to push damage. He's got a Vilespine Slayer to get rid of something that might be big and substantial for his opponent too.
Yeah, it's not over from him. He just needs to think about how can he close out the game from his opponent. He needs to be thinking, okay, if there's big power plays onto the board with things like Lich King, Cairn and Bone Mare, how do I fight back against that with my minions? Do I have the liberty to go for something like the Jade Behemoth in combination with Jade Spirit to try and ramp up my Jades as quickly as I can? But I kind of like this as a nice middle ground. Could have obviously used the hero power to start taking things out, but I think developing his own board, counting up the Jades to get them to the point where they can deal with those bigger minions, feels like a great way to lock out this game.
So a Lich King soon from Mitsuhide would be really nice for him.
Yeah.
Something to be able to generate some extra cards that might be able to make a big swing in this matchup. He does have Cold Blood, so there is the possibility later of Leroy into Shadow Step into Cold Blood to push some extra damage, providing the board is clear from your opponent. But looking at the hand from OldBoy, there is a whole lot of taunt that's going to be getting in the way of any sort of aggression that Mitsuhide tries to remove from his deck.
Yeah, even with this very powerful play onto the board from Mitsu, it's just not going to be getting the job done quite yet. From OldBoy, we could see Earthen Scales for obviously a bit of armor, but almost more importantly, the +1/+1 to smooth out these trades so nicely, and then go for, don't know, Jade Behemoth hero power. He can clear off, I believe, everything on this turn, or the vast majority at least, maybe just leaving up the Bone Mare. And then again, it's going to have to be Leroy's Valspine Slayers, maybe the Lich King, to close out this game, of which Mitsu does not have the majority of.
No, the Firefly being drawn, whilst it's decent, as it can proc the Valspine Slayer, of course, Mitsu needs to be finding some of his late game, but he's had some of his late game in his hand for most of the game.
Yep.
The Cairn and the Bone Mares. You're looking maybe, what, another Scalebane potentially, but the rest of his deck, he's still got Keleseth in there, still Edwin is in there as well being drawn, South Sea Captain still hasn't been drawn, so all of these pointless low-end minions at this time of the game really aren't going to help you.
And there we do see the Cold Blood, and it is only going to be getting more and more pointless as this game progresses, because it looks like Mitsu is basically all but conceded board control at this point, unless he gets perfect pickups, as we keep saying, a Bone Mare or Lich King, and his opponent has basically nothing in hand, which is very unlikely after an Ultimate Infestation. He has lost board control at this point, so Cold Blood will not be getting the job done, as once OldBoy has taken care of board, then he can start going for the armor ups with his hero power and just get out of the range of anything from Mitsu.
And it looks like currently the game plan from Evolution has worked out just fine.
Yep.
Queuing that J-Druid into this rogue. Finding the ramp is of course important. If you can trust that you can find that ramp, then to be fair, you can beat the majority of decks in Hearthstone. If you can get to a turn 6 Ultimate Infestation, that's going to be absolutely nuts. But Mitsuhide doing what he can here with this Valspine Slayer and the Cold Blood to try and clear off as much as possible. Try and break through this wall that OldBoy has set up. I know we've already travelled to the Great Wall this week, and of course all the players came with us as well, but that doesn't mean OldBoy has to set one up of his own.
Yeah. Nicely done. But he doesn't have to, but to be honest, he probably will. He's got the ability to do so in tremendous fashion with Spreading Plague and the Jade Behemoth once again. And coming back to OldBoy's play the last couple of turns, I like what he's been doing. He's had the option consistently to go for things like damage with the hero power, Earthen Scales to take out a few more of the minions, but he's gone purely for board development, and that's allowed him to make sure that even in situations like this, when Mitsuhide makes another strong play into the board, there's that perfect counterplay from OldBoy. He can keep up with the board, he's never falling behind, and when he's making 1 mana 7/7s, that is the kind of situation where you do not really lose.
I love this as well. Using the Earthen Scales just to make the trade, like you were saying a couple of turns ago. A lot of players would want to keep back the Earthen Scales just to get that extra bit of armor on a big Jade, perhaps, but not these professional players. They know when to hold them, and they know that they need to actually use this damage straight away to make sure your opponent cannot get bored. And a Vicious Fledgling, another whiff, another one of those small cards that Mitsuhide would have liked earlier on in the game. And this one is done and dusted. OldBoy does get a victory to tie this one up to 1-1. And Celestial, they've got to go back to the drawing board, and they have got to try and find something to counter this Druid. So, just looking through the decks now from Celestial, we have seen the majority of them. They have, of course, the Freeze Mage, if they want to go for something like that. Maybe that might be a possibility for them.
Yeah, the Quest Mage does seem like a decent option.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Of
Quest
course,
Mage,
sorry. as you know, unless we see a ridiculous start like that from the Druid, it can often find itself in the position where it can't push forward enough damage. But even more so than that, to be honest, I would expect to see something like the Murloc Paladin, which I think is even more so than usual in a great spot to take out the Jade Druid, because we see the Corpse Taker in there in combination with Blessing of Kings or Spike Ridge Steed. That is too powerful of a minion for the Jade Druid to deal with the vast majority of the time. And that's again why it's a very unusual pick from Evolution to go with the Jade Druid last game, because not only is it not particularly favoured against the Rogue, I would say, it's fairly easily counterable from these very board-centric tempo decks.
Last time that Celestial did have to face up against Jade Druid, they did queue a Quest Mage into it, and it was Tiddler as well, so this is definitely a possibility, but Tiddler has been an absolutely phenomenal player throughout the years. He did take a slight break from Hearthstone, but now he's back, and he wants to entertain his fans, and I think that's been a beautiful thing.
其他人也没有想到，我们最终我们组会是小组第一嘛。其实一开始表现也不太好，然后最后成绩还不错，也是我们一起努力的结果。除了Tom以外，我和明之光秀其实发挥的也不能说很好嘛。但是整体来说，我觉得我们之前因为在准备这个比赛之前，我们也语音啊等等，做了很多的准备，也练了好几天的牌，大家讨论了很多。我觉得我们整体和牌组啊和战术上都会安排的还行，所以就。 很多时候是算牌组上 counter 到了对面一些，所以才能取得这样的成绩嘛。但是其实这小组第一也没有什么特别大的意义，因为前四其实在我们的赛制当中也都差不多，而且我们下一个对手 Evolution 暴露的牌组又特别少。其实剩下的牌中应该是有玄机的，但是我们也做了一些设想吧，应该会也有一点可以针对的办法。
Tiddler is saying that he has counter strategies and Celestial are ready for whatever Evolution might be throwing their way. And rightly predicted by you, Darok, it is going to be this Murloc Paladin. We saw the absolute devastation of what this deck can do yesterday when there was 2 Corpse Takers on board.
Wow.
You then got the Blessing of Kings onto the Corpse Taker as well. It already had Wind Fury, and there was a burst of almost 20 damage on turn 4 or 5. It was absolutely nuts.
And that is what can happen with this deck. We saw from the Jade Druid last game pretty much almost the perfect scenario. So maybe we see that from the Murloc Paladin. And I would imagine if the perfect openers line up against each other, the Murloc Paladin is probably coming out ahead, because we could see very strong Murloc starts, Celestial including also the Cold Light Seer in their deck for even more Murloc synergy. And they're going to need it as OldBoy gets another very powerful ramping hand.
He does, but I guess that's a good sign for Tiddler there, the Stormwatcher being in his mulligan now.
Right.
So you can throw it away, you won't be in the situation of drawing the Stormwatcher during your mulligan. Of course, it could be the next card that comes out of the deck, but you certainly hope that that's going to sit in there for quite a while. Yeah,
it would be it's an interesting idea to play a deck where there's one card that you really don't want to draw. Maybe it'll catch on.
He does get a Tide Cooler though, so Tiddler will be happy about that mulligan. Now he just needs another Murloc to go alongside it. Of course, a Rockball Hunter would be perfect. Grimscale Chum, that works as well.
Yeah, and unless he picks up another Murloc on the following turn, maybe we see the Grimscale Chum coming down first. Obviously, if you can get +1/+1, that's better than just +1 attack, all things considered, from the Grimscale Chum. So it's kind of just a gamble if he does want to go for the Grimscale Chum on the next turn anyway. There's a very good chance he just goes Hero Power after the after the Tide Caller, sorry. So I still expect to see the Tide Caller first because of that 2 health in particular.
This is always a debate as well of Murloc Paladin, what's the best start, Tide Caller or Grimscale Chum. It happens so often. Even sometimes when you have the coin, people argue, which should I be going for? Should I be trying to buff up my Tide Caller before I putting it on the board? Or should I be able to just put the Grimscale Chum? So it does open up this play for OldBoy. He's able to just coin out his Hero Power, deal with that first Murloc. And now Tiddler's going to be hoping maybe for another 1-drop. Oh, hello.
And there it is. And
hey, mate.
Maybe Tiddler is even considering this a victory. If he just got the coin from his opponent, maybe that means Ultimate Infestation, Malfurion, Spreading Plague are 1 turn further away. And those are some of the most key cards in this matchup.
And that's already a scary looking board. OldBoy, if he wants to ramp up here, he's going to be leaving a Murloc that could be buffing up. If there's a War Leader in your opponent's hand, then suddenly there's so much damage that's going to be heading your way. And that might tempt you into a Wrath, but then if you're Wrathing next turn, you've got nothing. You've just got that Wild Growth. So is this a risk worth taking, do you think, Darok?
So looking at the last couple of turns from Tiddler, I think OldBoy can realise there's no Rockpool Hunter, because if there was a Rockpool Hunter in one of the 2 remaining cards from Tiddler, he probably would have gone Tidecaller.
Oh my goodness gracious me.
He probably would have gone for the Tidecaller first to give himself a much higher chance of landing the Rockpool Hunter on it on turn 2. And therefore, I think OldBoy can assume fairly safely he will be able to get an attack.
Ooh.
He will be able to kill off the Tidecaller as the first Eater of Secrets of the tournament is picked up.
It is, and imagine if Celestial had queued that Quest Mage into this Druid. That would have been the perfect opportunity for Evolution to chew down on a secret, but instead they're looking down, well, a very rusty barrel with some Murlocs in it at the moment that are heading towards them. And you've only got a Swipe or a Wrath to try and deal with this board, but even taking away the Murloc War Leader, that Tidecaller is still doing so much damage.
Very scary indeed, and because of that, maybe he goes for the Swipe just because it's the highest mana play, and the hero power afterwards really isn't doing all too much. And the thing is, okay, with this play of saving back the Swipe, maybe it's slightly better against Gentle Megasaur, but I don't really know if you're going to be winning a Gentle Megasaur game anyway if it is also in hand, because that would just be an absolutely nut start. As another War Leader is picked up. Tiddler is just top-decking and wrecking in this game.
Tiddler, I mean, teach me. How on earth do these players do this? Throughout this entire tournament, we've seen Zoo games where they're getting the perfect Doom Guards, they're getting the perfect Keleseth, and Tiddler has been piloting Murloc Paladin so successfully at this tournament. We saw the Corpse Taker disgustingness yesterday, well, a few days ago in the group stages, and now this is so awkward for OldBoy as well. You've just got your Swipe. That is literally the only thing you can do in this position. If you play a minion, you're just dead. You're not even at the point where you can play your Spreading Plague. Poor
he has to go for it, and it's a sad situation when a Swipe is baited out by a Tidecaller over a War Leader, as that is still 9 damage available on this turn. And to be honest, I quite heavily expect that Tiddler will not even hero power on this turn. Ooh. Okay, so if he had gone with the weapon here and not played that, then he would have still lost to Spreading Plague. He wouldn't have won on that turn, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you're opening up, you know there's a possibility of Spreading Plague coming, but at this point, 2-1-5s, any better than 3-1-5s? I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. You're going to have so much mana available in the coming turns. Actually, unless you pick up a Bone Mare as well. This is still looking pretty good from Tiddler, but I would have liked to have seen a much slower turn there. At least consider the benefits of saving back the Murloc there. But I guess at the end of the day, it does still have 3 health, 3 attacks, sorry, to take out some of these Scarabs.
And at the end of the day, we all go to bed.
So it just gets funnier every time, doesn't it, Dan? Every time.
Unfortunately, he can't clear off all of the Scarabs, whereas if he hadn't played the Inquisitor, of course, he could have cleared off both of the Scarabs. And now for OldBoy, yes, okay, he's put one defensive mechanism in the way, but now he needs to find another.
And it ain't there, Dan.
No.
I hate to say it, but the Behemoth on its own, I just don't think is going to be getting the job done after the Bone Mare comes down. But I don't think OldBoy has any choice to go for anything other than that. As he just gives up. He's dead on board anyway. So.
Yeah, he concedes, and unfortunately, the counter from Celestial has been perfect, and Evolution have to go back, and now, OldBoy, he's eliminated. Frozen is eliminated. It's down to the current world champion to try and bring this one back for Team Evolution. But what on earth do you go into? What can you try and counter with, but also then win another game with Darok?
Well, from Evolution or from Pavel, we've seen the power of Zoo. Pavel is the last player left. Zoo is far and away his best win rate deck in the tournament. He's played a whole bunch of games with it here. And I believe it does have the ability to beat the Murloc Paladin. And it then also has the ability to beat pretty much the vast majority of what Celestial have left. The Quest Mage is probably a bit too slow. The N'Zoth Control Warrior, perhaps a little bit too vulnerable to the mid to late game of the Zoo. It's going to be a difficult couple of games from Celestial.
But Pavel has been quite the personality so far this tournament. There's been laughter, there's been waves, there's been threatening eyes dashed across the room to try and threaten his opponents. But a 10-win and 4-loss win record. Pavel has been quite the player, and I believe we are going to find out a little bit more about it.
Absolutely fine for us. and there's no much difference between first and fourth place. It's way more important to hide decks, and we managed to show up only 3 decks of our lineup, while other teams shows way more decks, which is a really high advantage for our team. So yeah, absolutely, it's a great result, and I think we have highest chance of winning the tournament. I think that Team Celestial is probably one of the strongest team in this tournament. They have good players. Mitsuhide is a great deck builder. Tidler is the guy who got second place in the first Hearthstone World Championship, and Tom is also pretty decent. But I think that we have better strategy, better lineup, and we already beat them in a group stage, even without the full potential of our lineup. So I think we have a great chance for beating them, and I just want to say to them to have a good match and play well. I hope you're better at Hearthstone than at ping pong.
Pavel is quite the character. He doesn't look like it when you first see him. You don't realise the personality that is behind him. Quite a funny story, when we were on the Great Wall together, we had some people taking pictures with us, obviously because we look a bit different, and of course there's all of that. And Pavel was like, why are they taking pictures with us? Is it because I am world champion? I was like, yes, of course, Pavel.
Whatever, mate.
It's because you're world champion, and they're also, I'm here as well, I'm just your buddy. In the end, I just became his Instagram husband, actually. I had to take many a photo of him on the Great Wall. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but my hands did not, as they almost froze away.
Need the fingerless gloves, man.
One day, maybe I'll be able to pick them up. But Pavel is going to be going into this game then with the Warlock, deck that he has been very proficient with so far in this tournament. We've seen him get the sweeps with it. Maybe he is going to be able to bring this one back for Team Evolution. But that's a pretty nice start for Tidler here. And actually, the Corpse Taker is pretty influential in this matchup.
Yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting one, because one of the main reasons it was theorized as a card you put in the deck originally was because it kind of just stomps all over Pirate Warrior, because you can get the Lifesteal, the Wind Fury, Divine Shield, Taunt. It's all just too much. But considering this is more of a board control deck rather than a pure face aggro deck, I like throwing it away here as, well, how does Tidler choose to dominate the early game? He's spoilt for choices. Yeah,
I didn't realize Mulligan actually read throw away the cards and get the ones you definitely need for this matchup, because it must say that for Tidler. It seems to work out absolutely perfectly. I mean, War Leader's probably going to come next as well.
And then a Mega Sword to close things out. Why not?
But I mean, we jest, but actually things have been going pretty well for Pavel when he's been playing these Zoo decks.
That's very true.
I remember the Brawl into the Doomguard, then the Doomguard top deck to win the game as well. So certainly Pavel is more than happy to go up against a player that also has a little bit of lady luck.
So here for Pavel, looking at the options he's got available to him, he knows that one card was kept in the opening hand, and it is the leftmost card, which was not played on this turn. So I think there's a decent chance that that would be a Rockpool Hunter, because of the cards you keep in this matchup, it's going to be one-drop Murlocs, maybe the Rallying Blade, and Rockpool Hunter that have a great shot of locking out the early game. So he needs to think about not only what is currently on board, but what it's going to be looking like when Tidler gets to trade in next turn.
So maybe Voidwalker coin into Agarus Veteran? I don't like it.
Yeah, it doesn't work out too great.
Probably going to have to just coin out the Firefly, I imagine. I mean, you don't have to coin anything at all.
That's true.
But it depends how worried you are about Rockpool Hunter. You saw that there was at least one card kept in your opponent's hand, and you know it wasn't this Tidecaller as well. So what is your opponent going to be keeping realistically?
Yep. There is a very, very good chance indeed that it is the Rockpool Hunter, as he goes for Voidcaller, coin into Firefly. This was such a complex turn. So many different combinations of plays he could have gone for. And this is still, to be honest, kind of weak to Rockpool. Just playing the Voidwalker full stop is fairly weak to the Rockpool Hunter, because you're putting a lot of health and it trades the same anyway. But because of this, Pavel is able to take it out pretty nicely. But at the same time, I would have expected double Firefly or Firefly coin Flame Elemental on the last turn rather than the Voidwalker. But I guess if there isn't Rockpool Hunter, it's much better to get out the War Leader, or to get out the Void Walker,
yeah,
sorry.
I think you take the chance that your opponent doesn't have it, but then you also have the backup player, the Firefly and Alchemist Veteran, in case it does, I presume. That's what Pavel's gone for. At least he has dealt with the crazy amount of damage that could have been going towards him by taking out the Tidecaller, but there is an Inquisitor available, so more pressure can be put onto the board. And of course, you just want to stay ahead against the Zoolock. If at any point you give control back to the Zoo, then you're going to be in a nasty situation. But once again, now we are seeing the speed of which Pavel plays these games. You wouldn't think that this is currently a game that might get them an extra 10, 20k.
It absolutely is, and that shows how difficult that first turn was for Pavel. Taking the full turn timer is not something you'll often see from Pavel whatsoever, as he just blitzes through his turns 2 and 3 and leaves Tidler with some decent options, but some difficult choices.
Yeah, so Rallying Blade allows you to deal with the Flame Imp comfortably, but you are leaving things on board there. This is the thing, the Rallying Blade, you're looking across 2 turns. You're going into your opponent's turn 4. I mean, I can see a Saronite Chain Gang, so I'm liking Rallying Blade. Do you want to save back the Blessing of Kings for a little bit more burst damage later on, potentially?
I'm kind of thinking at this point, not that Blessing of Kings might be better later on, it might be a lot worse later on, because even though you can go for the Rallying Blade this turn, take out the majority of minions, there's a chance that your board is just killed off, and you have nothing to throw down the Blessing of Kings on the following turn. But given it's going into turn 4, and there needs to be 1 extra damage coming in from Pavel, there's not actually too many ways that it can be done. Maybe another Acarus Veteran, Patches being pulled out of the deck. There's a decent chance that this minion sticks around, and it does for Tidler. He can still land the Blessing of Kings on this turn, so it's been perfectly navigated by Tidler. Yeah,
Blessing plus the Rallying Blade allows him to deal with both these Saronite Chain Gangs and just leaves a measly 1-2 Flame Elemental on the board, but now we can see the Doom Guard is there for Pavel. Of course, he will be throwing away this Bone Mare guaranteed next turn. Whatever he draws might be thrown away as well. That's not too bad. So I imagine you are just going to go for a Doom Guard here.
Yeah, I don't really think he can go for much else. Obviously, you're throwing away 2 pretty nice cards because it's a Patches Activator and the Bone Mare for the following turns to really start pushing your advantage. But going into turn 6 from the Paladin, that card on the left, the Bone Mare, has been there for a while, so it could be the Spike Ridge Steed. But maybe Pavel's got the read that it's not there, so he's happy to leave it alive. It's a difficult turn, but I know that I would let the Bone Mare, let the Doom Guard come down straight away and seize back board control.
Yep, of course you lose your hand, but you have the hero power, so you can be able to tap into things. The Rallying Blade can just sweep up this Doom Guard comfortably, and then I imagine the Cold Light Seer can be put on the board just as a 2-3.
I like it a lot. There's...
Again, you're still ahead on board here. The Zoo is trying to come back with things like Doom Guard, but Councilman, okay, that is at least some pressure now.
It's something. But the Seer coming down on the last turn, allowing the Bone Mare to come down also with a weapon in hand, means that any meaningful minion on the board here can be cleared up. Unless a Bone Mare is picked up, the second and final Bone Mare for Pavel can be picked up on this very next turn. I just don't think he's going to be able to bring this back.
Maybe this is going to be the end of the winner's bracket run for Evolution. There's a Doom Guard, so at least that does compete with something. But with now Finger being picked up from Tidler and a Megasaur to follow, he's in such a good spot at this point.
He is indeed, but it's worth thinking about now. There's a 5-1 on the board, which Tidler does not want to trade his Bone Mare into. If something like Soulfires can start to be picked up, maybe the Blood Reaver Gul'dan, that's quite a lot of damage that can be pushed towards the face. So Tidler is now going to have to think about ways that he just dies to burst. And it looks like he's not going to be taking the healthy line of play to preserve his health total. So maybe he'll start being a little bit under threat of Soulfire and Blood Reaver Gul'dan outs.
Pavel is going to tap and look for more options. There is one of those Soulfires, so that allows him to deal with everything on this board except, of course, Finger.
Do you think he goes for that, though, or does he just go for face? If he can bring his opponent down to 10, all of a sudden, Blood Reaver Gul'dan is lethal.
Just clearing what he can here.
Wow.
And it will just be Finger. It does mean that Finger can't activate unless it gets something that actually allows it to activate. And I guess a Blessing of Kings can do that, because, you know, Tidler is just fantastic at getting these cards when he needs them. And OldBoy, this is looking pretty scary now for Evolution. Murloc's drawn onto the board. You can then buff them up with the Megasaur as well. I think we're seeing the series head towards Celestial here, Darok.
I think it could be indeed. Maybe the pickup of Taunt there would have been worth considering because of the fact that all of a sudden the Blood Reaver Gul'dan doesn't allow any kind of crazy possibilities to occur. But the +1/+1 here means that it is all but lethal, I believe, on the following turn, just a tiny bit off. But any kind of damage top deck from Tiddler will be able to close out this game in his favor, and that is just not the card that Pavel needed. Neither is that. I think this is going to be going to Tiddler.
They've revealed such little information. They had such an advantage going into this game. But Celestial, they've just been able to dominate this. And they've got, what, 15, 17 damage now. They are so far ahead. And there is little no chance of Pavel getting back into this one. What, Blood Reaver Gul'dan? Even that's not going to be helping you at this point. Celestial's been an absolutely incredible performance. Tiddler with this Paladin as well. Okay, yes, he's been drawing perfectly, but there have been some decisions that he's had to make that he has just piloted this deck very successfully here.
I would have to agree with you. In particular, the play where he could have gone for Blessing of Kings, but went for the off-mana cost Rallying Blade instead. He knew there was such a good chance his minion would stick around for the buff. And I think it's that kind of play that has led him to a victory, as Pavel can't even get a single win with his Zoo.
Incredible stuff for Team Celestial as they take the victory there. Evolution will fall to the losers bracket, so it's not over for them. They still have the opportunity to come back into this tournament, and maybe they'll get another opportunity to take on Team Celestial when we get to those grand finals. The last time they matched up, it was Evolution who had a 3-0 sweep, but now with a little bit more strategy, Celestial, they give a nice wave.